Hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Dunstan. I'm from the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute and also the Institute of Physical Activity and Nutrition at Deakin University. And welcome to today's discussion on the Goldilocks approach to a healthy 24-hour day. I wanted to just alert everybody that I am not Daniel Harford. Sadly, Daniel has come down quite unwell and was unable to undertake his MC or hosting duties. So I've stepped in to help out, and I'll try and do as good a job as Daniel would have done. But we'll still have the same presenters as we've advertised earlier. Before I commence, I wish to acknowledge, I'll take a moment to reflect the meaning of place, and in doing so recognise the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. I myself am located on the Wurundjeri country, and on behalf of all of us, I pay our respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also would like to pay our respects to their elders, elders and ancestors, for allowing us to have our gathering on their land and acknowledge their continuing connection to this beautiful country, and thank them for their care and custodianship over many thousands of years. And I extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We'd also like to recognise the various traditional lands on which anyone joining us via Zoom are on today, and it appears to be quite diverse in terms of people's locations today. And well, thank you for joining our discussion on the Goldilocks approach to a healthy 24-hour day. Today, we really want to delve into the research and evidence around whether we're sitting too much and moving too little, and what can we do about that and to improve our daily lives. The Baker-Deakin Department of Lifestyle and Diabetes at the Institute of Physical Activity and Nutrition, or IPAN, I'll call it from now on, and the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute have joined forces and have brought together leading researchers who have found the Goldilocks approach, or finding your just right, or the just right balance of time spent sitting, standing, sleeping and moving over a 24-hour day to enjoy a healthier heart, body and mind. And we're going to hear a lot more from our researchers that are leading researchers in the field on this topic. And our panelists include Dr. Simone Verswijveren. I can never say your name properly, Simone, but you can introduce your name a little bit later. Who's an Alfred Deakin Postdoctoral Research Fellow and a colleague of mine at IPAN. Dr. Patty Dempsey, who's an NHMRC Research Fellow within the Baker-Deakin Department of Lifestyle and Diabetes. And we're very, very fortunate to have Sarah Berry joining us today, who is the Lifestyle Health Editor for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And so a warm welcome to you, Sarah, and to Simone and Patty. Okay, today we're going to cover this story, and hopefully we've attracted your attention with the title of the Goldilocks approach to a 24-hour healthy day. Now, just to set the scene a little bit, I think we are all familiar with the famous fairy tale Goldilocks and the Three Bears, with the key message there about identifying what's too much, what's too little, on what is just right. And you'll hear from all of our speakers today about how can we find our just right balance of time in the day for adults and also for children. And we really want to present the latest research on that just right balance, and also as Sarah joins us, hear some personal experiences on how to make the most of the opportunities throughout the day to get more movement or more incidental physical activity throughout the day. And you can also have your questions answered by the researchers in the field. So couple of housekeeping notes. If you haven't already submitted any questions yet, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box. You may type your questions in throughout the presentations, and these will either be read out during the panel discussion or answered in the chat. And if we do run out of time to answer all the questions during the session, we'll be able to follow up with a response afterwards. But just a note that please remember that we are needing to stick to broader questions on this topic, and all of the panelists are experts in the field of physical activity. So we really are focusing today on that health promoting behaviour of physical activity. So really don't want to expand into other areas like nutrition just today, when we can follow up with another webinar on nutrition. And finally, just as you probably entered into the webinar, we are recording today's session, so please just accept that as it came through. Today is National, for those who don't know, National Ride to Work Day, in which I practice what I preach. My bike just next to me here. So it reminds us that there of one way to get our incidental activity or our physical activity during our commute to and from work. So we also want to hear how we can achieve these goals in our busy days, and you hear from all of us about what we may be able to do, and how incidental physical activity can play an important role in working towards a healthy 24-hour day. So that's our introduction to today's webinar. I'm just now going to share my slides, and you always have a bit of a panic attack that this is going to work. And whoops. And hopefully, and if one of my panelists can just give me the indication thumbs up, you can see the slides there. Hopefully.
Looks good, David.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's always good to know if your slides are appearing. But I just wanted to introduce the Baker-Deakin Department of Lifestyle and Diabetes. And as you can see, this is a joint effort from the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute and also the Institute for Physical Activity and Nutrition at Deakin University. And it's bringing together world-renowned researchers from both institutions to really start to advance our strategies and solutions for tackling one of the greatest chronic conditions of our time, and that's type 2 diabetes. And it's a collaborative partnership which was formed in February 2022 and an initial 5-year term. And just very briefly, it has an integrated research program looking at relationships, and you'll hear more about that today as I talk about some of the research, relationships of physical activity and sedentary behaviour on health outcomes, extending into experimental research and intervention research. You can see a height adjustable desk. We've done a lot of studies in schools and also workplaces, and then looking at how can we implement those programs more widely. So to hop into setting the scene, if you like, with my presentation, and I alluded to the Goldilocks just right. And so what I really wanted to just provide the background and some of the evidence of how we can find a better balance of sitting, standing, stepping, and sleeping time for better health every day. And I've been researching this topic for more than 20 years now, and I am continuing to be amazed of how much this is changing in terms of how we message this at the population health level. And when I first started out, it really was a message around get more exercise, and that type of exercise, that strenuous type of exercise, was really advocated widely. But over the last 10 years or so, that messaging has become more broader in terms of simply moving more to get those benefits. And there are opportunities throughout the day, like using the stairs instead of the elevator, that can enhance the amount of movement that we do throughout the day. So I think hopefully this audience will appreciate that the moving more message is a really important public health promotion message. But I circle back to back into 2008, actually, where we started to do some initial research to explore the full picture of what people do throughout a full 24-hour day. And this is a bit of a funny note of this is my first ever height adjustable desk. Well, I wouldn't call it height adjustable. It's a fixed standing desk made from a box that my father had made me, but it allowed me to interchange between a posture of sitting and also standing to get some more movement throughout the day. So we're really going back to 2008. And since then, over the last 10, 15 years, ourselves and many other groups around the world have really shed light on this population reality pie chart. To highlight this, when we put devices on people to be able to monitor their time over the day, it's striking that the highest volume of time is spent essentially sitting. And the average Australian adult can sit for nearly 9 to 10 hours per day. In terms of exercise, and that's the green part in that pie, this represents only a small proportion of the day, less than 5% of the day. And what we do know is that we have a majority of the population who are not meeting our minimum recommended levels for exercise. So what we have seen now, and many studies around the world, have shown that if we look at this from a holistic perspective, we not only need to focus on moving more, but also sitting less throughout the day. And what has really helped us in this research field is this quantified self era. And I'm sure there'll be many of you who are on this call who are either wearing a Apple Watch or a Garmin, etc., or a Fitbit. What these devices have done is started to allow us to look at the full day that a person is wearing these devices. And so what we can do is start to contextualize this as a 24-hour day. How are people breaking up their time throughout the day? And this has allowed us to move beyond just simply asking people questions about what they do during the day to getting this to every single minute of the day is accounted for through the various behaviors that a person undertakes throughout the day. So to circle back to the theme today of the Goldilocks approach, and this is that real focus on that either too much or too little, finding out what is the just right for the balance between these behaviors that you can see here that are undertaken over a 24-hour day. And this is the only slide that I'll show some data, and I'll elaborate on this a little bit more. We worked very closely last year and published this last year, worked closely with colleagues in the Netherlands, where we were able to put these devices on nearly just over 2,500 people who wore the device over a 7-day period. And what we can do then is link their behaviors or their time use to their risk of having a high waist circumference or middle area, central adiposity, their blood glucose levels, their general a risk of having a cardiometabolic condition like cardiovascular or risk of cardiovascular disease or diabetes. I won't go into the detail here because I really wanted to illustrate this through this the Goldilocks. And what we did identify is that when we start to analyze this data across full 24 hours a day, we can identify the sweet spot or the just right for these various behaviors. And I'm just going to show these what we identified is that achieving that 8 hours, 8.5 hours a day was more favourable than lower amounts of sleep and higher amounts of sleep. In terms of sitting, what we identified was that the sweet spot was around about the 6 hours per day. And for standing time, that was around about 5 hours or so throughout the day. So remember, these devices are measuring every single minute throughout the day. So we're getting a lot of data to be able to inform this. In terms of moving, we can move in a light manner. So this is that pottering around, or we could walk more briskly, like a moderate intensity. And so the breakdown there was to try and achieve that 2 hours of that light and 2 hours that moderate intensity activity. Remember that this is accumulated across the day. So you can do a minute here, a minute there, and accumulate that time throughout the day. And I'll just finish off with our perspective on how we can get a 24-hour day of sitting less and moving more. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we need to use a staircase approach, because people may not be used to engaging in that regular exercise or brisk walking, and maybe just starting at a very low base of just try and get less sitting. And once we can get less sitting, we can then progress up the staircase to standing and moving more, and increasingly moving more throughout the day at a more brisker pace. So I think what I've attempted to do is set the scene of how we can incorporate more moving throughout the day and sitting less throughout the day. And of course, we'll give you opportunities to ask questions at the end of all the presenters. And now would like to hand over to Simone, who's an Alfred Deakin postdoctoral research fellow, and she's going to really provide us with the up-to-date evidence on the 24-hour day in children and adolescents. And I just need to stop sharing my screen, which stop the share. And so Simone is really going to focus on how we can get our children enough movement in their day, and how do their needs change as they grow from toddlers into children. So Simone, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi everyone, just checking you can see my slides okay, David?
Yep, all good.
Yes. All right, hi. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk to everyone here today. As David said, my first name is Simone. My last name is Verswijveren. Not quite nailed that one, but that's okay. It's a long last name from the Netherlands, hence my accent as well. I'm based at IPAN, Deakin University, and work there as a postdoc researcher. And my work really looks into how children spend their days, how much time they are being active, sitting and sleeping, and how that links to their health. And today I want to talk about what the just right day is for children. So we've just obviously heard from David about some evidence in adults, and you might think that most of those same concepts apply to children. And whilst some of that's true, children's days are also very different to those of adults. So before I'm going into the health impacts, I'm just going to flag some differences between children's and adults' movements, behaviors. So when we think about a typical day, adults tend to spend much time of their day sitting at desks, in cars, behind a computer at work, and often have to make a really conscious effort to be active. And for anyone on this webinar who's a parent or a grandparent, you may know that children are a bit different in that sense. They run and jump and play, and they switch all day between sitting and resting, and they never really seem to sit still. But modern life is changing that. So during school hours, most of the day is actually spent sitting in the classroom with only 2 short breaks, recess and lunchtime, where they can be active. And this in combination with the appeal of screens, such as gaming and social media, really leads to higher levels of sitting in children as well. And young children are the fastest growing users of screens. For example, in 2025, estimates indicate that at the age of 6, 62% already own a tablet or a phone. Lastly, children's health in active habits are really impacted by their parents, as they're not always able or allowed to make their own decisions. So parents are shaping healthy behaviors by being role models and setting rules, and also being really active in creating opportunities to move. So for example, taking them to the park. With adults often not being sufficiently active, we also have issues with children being sufficiently active. So researchers and health experts in Australia and from the World Health Organization have created these 24-hour movement guidelines. They are specifically for children and teenagers. And these are different for each of the age groups, but typically say that they should be engaging in an hour of moderate to vigorous, which is really that huff and puff physical activity per day. Spend no more than 2 hours of screen time per day for recreation, and then sleep for about 8 to 11 hours a day. And the key message of these guidelines is not that it's just about ticking each of these boxes individually, but really trying to make that all together work across the day. So overall, to move more, sit less, and sleep well. And unfortunately, kids in Australia are not very good at meeting these guidelines. So 18% only is sufficiently active. About 29% meet the screen time guidelines. And as a result, there's 1 in 4 children roughly overweight or obese in Australia. And this can not only impact their short-term health, but also increase health issues at later life. So for example, risk of diabetes or other cardiovascular health issues. So what is the evidence really saying about the relationship between 24-hour movement behaviors and health in children? Let's start with sleep. So we know that adequate sleep is essential for children to grow and develop, really to be able to learn properly. And for younger children, my PhD student has showed that napping is associated with better emotional self-regulation, so managing their emotions, less meltdowns and tantrums when they're tired. There's also sitting and screen use that are big parts of their day, and some of that's unavoidable, for example, during a meal or in the car. But higher amounts of screen time specifically have been linked to less healthy body composition, so higher body fat, as well as lower self-esteem, lower fitness, and poorer school performances. In terms of physical activity, and for kids specifically, that might be climbing or dancing or active play, the research shows that being active, especially at higher intensity, is really important and linked to better thinking skills, stronger emotional well-being, and healthier hearts and bodies. So up until recently, most of the research just focused on one of these components, but now researchers have found some clever new way to kind of look at all these behaviors together and sort of model what the best day is for health. So the Goldilocks day, what we're talking about here. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples in where I've been involved into kind of modeling that Goldilocks day or the perfect day for children's health. So the first example is this work led by my colleague Catherine Downing. This is in preschoolers in the Bowen infant cohort study. And the children wore these little monitors that you see here on the picture. And they wore it for about a week, and then also did an extensive health check at their preschool visits. So measured things like height, weight, body fat, and also heart related measures. And based on body fat, the just right day that we identified was about 6 hours of sitting, 4 hours of light activity, 60 minutes of moderate activity, and then 32 minutes of kind of that high intensity, vigorous activity. And if you compare that to the children that scored the worst in terms of body fat, you see that they specifically engaged in a little bit less of that vigorous activity in their days. We also did that in a Victorian primary school aged sample in a transformer study, which is in a little bit older children, grade 3 and 4. These children were, and they also were one of those activity monitors. And then we took height and weight measurements during school visits. And based on their quality of life, in this case, we assessed, they showed that 8 hours and 18 minutes of time should be spent sitting, 3 hours in light activity, and then 49 minutes in moderate and 43 in vigorous. So that's about half an hour more than what the guidelines are actually recommending. And you can see that the worst scoring part of the sample that engaged in activity actually didn't meet the guidelines. So you can see that meeting those guidelines in terms of moderate and vigorous activity was quite important here for their quality of life. So a few little take-home messages before I wrap up. Children's movement behaviors are not quite the same as those of adults, and they're quite complex, shaped by many factors like play and family environment. All the research that I presented here just then is mostly focused on something that's called cross-sectional research, so really measuring the activity and the outcomes at the same time. But we really need some more long-term research to understand how this also affects the health in later life. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll wait for your questions in the chat afterwards.
Oh, thank you so much, Simone, and thanks for the pronunciation. I'll work on it one day. And I do know that you have young children of your own. So are you practicing what you preach at home with your children?
I try. I definitely, my kids are very active. I don't have to do much for that. I don't know if that is because we're active as a family, but I can't seem to keep them inside for the whole day. So we visit the park a lot, and they do different sports activities as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We will be able to elaborate in the question and answer time, and we'll just move to Paddy Dempsey. And Paddy is here with me at the Baker-Deakin Department of Lifestyle and Diabetes, and is a postdoctoral fellow. Paddy, what can you tell us about for adults? Are we moving towards 24-hour guidelines here in Australia?
Cool. Thanks very much. Can you just check you can see my
Sure.
slides?
Yeah.
All good. All right. Well, thanks to everyone for joining today. Simone just talked about how a balanced 24-hour day matters for kids, and I'm picking up on that story for adults. So I'm just going to briefly touch on why and how we're looking at this whole 24-hour day approach, what's coming in the new Australian adult guidelines that are coming out the end of this year, and how some new digital platforms are being developed for type 2 diabetes that could help put some of these ideas into everyday life. So just to start, for a bit of context, the figure on the left here just sort of illustrates what's already been spoken about by David and Simone, but it's really about how this 24-hour approach pushes us to think more about how all these behaviors fit together and interact with for our health. So rather than treating them as separate silos or boxes. As an example, when we think about the 24-hour day as a whole, we can think about it as a series of trade-offs. So an example here is two different people, person 1 and person 2, who actually have the same mortality or risk of early death. Person 1 over here, you can see, engages in very little moderate to vigorous activity, only 3 minutes, but moves a lot throughout the day, has more light activity and less sedentary time. Person 2 on the right over here fits in quite a bit of moderate to vigorous exercise into their day, but otherwise sits quite a lot and has lower light activity. And really what this illustrates in kind of a simple way is that there are multiple kind of pathways or options for reducing our risk or improving our health. And in theory, people could choose their own just right approach to suit their needs and preferences. So looking at the 24 hours provides new opportunities to target key deficits in those 24-hour behaviors, harness synergies and interactions between the behaviors, but also ideally design more flexible and person-centered interventions in a more holistic and equitable way in the future when we're thinking about behavior change interventions. Just a bit of an idea about how guidelines for adults have kind of changed over time. They've sort of steadily evolved. The US guidelines in 2018 and the UK 2019 updates removed the old rule that activity had to be done in 10-minute bouts. So even short bursts of activity now count. The World Health Organization 2020 guidelines were more inclusive and added stronger focus around sedentary time and light movement and their interaction between each other. And then at around about the same time, the Canadians also joined it all together and to form the first 24-hour movement guidelines for adults that integrated sitting, moving, and sleeping. And now Australia are moving this way with 24-hour guidelines being released later on this year. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what the Canadian guidelines look like, because they're a bit of a model for what we might expect to see for the Australian adults one. But really what they do is they show how it all connects together in quite a practical way, I think. So in the top box there, I've just pulled out a few bits of information. So it won't be surprising that you'll see 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity there. And incorporating some strength work and encouraging light activity. So those are some features around the activity component. For sedentary behavior, the Canadians put a threshold in of under 8 hours as being a target to aim for, and also less than 3 hours of recreational screen time, and breaking up sitting as part of that piece. They've also got sleep guidelines, 7 to 9 hours for good quality regular sleep. There are slight differences there for older adults in that the sleep recommendation is slightly lower, but also there's some balance and functional type exercises that are included for older adults. I guess the big takeaway from these guidelines is that there's also no lower limit for benefits, and any move in the right direction for any of these guidelines can be helpful. So that's kind of a key message that's really highlighted in there. What's particularly new, I guess, in this space around 24-hour movement is this integrated statement, which is based more on more advanced sort of time use or compositional data analysis approaches. And I guess to simplify that into something visual, I think the way I think about it is preserving sleep first, and then trying to replace more sitting or sedentary time with any activity you can, and if possible, trade some of that light activity for higher intensity bursts. So a little bit speaking to what David mentioned or about that stepwise approach, but really that's what that integrated piece is all about. It's probably also worth noting that that integrated recommendation is where there's the lowest level of evidence at the moment. It's mostly based on cross-sectional evidence, but really that's where there's a push for more evidence to figure out what would that optimal balance be. And it's likely that it's going to be different for each person. And that really pushes us in this direction of a kind of more personalized approach, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later. Another sort of perspective on this that I think is quite helpful, just as another way of viewing this. This was a position statement was released by the American Diabetes Association a couple of years ago after the Canadian guidelines. But really, rather than thinking it's a 24-hour framework, but it's thinking about it more as 5 S's. So you can see them along the top right there. Sitting, stepping, which is really more of a focus on any activity or total activity or light activity. Sweating, which is more focused around moderate to vigorous, purposeful exercise, strengthening, and then sleep. So each of these 5 S's is already known for their standalone benefits, and they're often recommended in lifestyle interventions. But what this sort of statement does is try to weave the different strands together and focuses on their pragmatic delivery. So it's more holistic, and it's quite a memorable checklist, I think, thinking about 5 S's that can easily be fitted into daily practice. And I guess part of the message is also that you don't need perfection or to necessarily meet all of them, but small sustainable changes in the right direction for any of these behaviors is probably going to yield some benefits and move someone along the path. In terms of the Australian 24-hour guidelines for adults that are coming out, I mentioned there that they're currently sitting with the Health Minister. The report was submitted earlier this year, so we're waiting for them to be released. But I just wanted to point out a few things you can expect without actually telling you what they are. They'll be more modernized. They'll be a bit like those Canadian 24-hour guidelines. They'll be building on the evidence base from those guidelines using a rigorous sort of grade approach. But hopefully, as part of all this, they'll be more flexible, inclusive, and by that they'll sort of be providing options for individuals and practitioners along that 24-hour spectrum. But also, for the first time, they'll be including additional populations. So people with chronic conditions will be in there. People with living with disabilities will be included, and also people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So these are all the evidence base has been assessed in these population groups, and guidelines have been developed alongside stakeholders and interviews. So I think for the first time, we'll sort of see something more inclusive and builds upon the Canadian guidelines. But there was also an additional piece that will be a world first around more specific evidence-based guidance on daily steps, something that was highly valued by consumer and stakeholders as part of our meetings. And so that's been included as part of this package of new sets of guidelines. So here's some things to look out for later on in the year. So just to change tack a little bit, of course, having this guidance on what to do is one thing, but doing it is another. And in this particular context, for the work I do around people living with diabetes, these people are often juggling many things at once, mostly between clinic visits. So things like glucose, medications, food, 24-hour movement, sleep and stress, and various other things. Support for people with diabetes can be pretty patchy and generic, especially for people living in regional or remote areas or culturally diverse communities. So as we move towards these more sort of personalized 24-hour approaches that encompass the whole day, we're probably going to need more smart sort of digital tools to be able to assess what people's behaviors are, and then hopefully find ways to allow them to move to their healthy balance, and also scale it up with digital interventions. So really the goal is to try and find that right intervention for the right person at the right time. And part of the work we're trying to do is develop some of that work in that space through a platform that we've developed that is called Smart T2D. So just a bit of a sneak peek of what this might look like. this smart type 2 diabetes ecosystem or platform is built upon some nice work done by Professor Ralph Madison's group here at Deakin. It's basically, what their focus was initially called Smart Heart, which was focused on people with heart failure. And we're trying to adapt some of this work for people with diabetes. And the idea is really to try and bring everything together. Things like continuous glucose monitoring, wearables, tracking movement, sitting and sleep, and simple check-ins on things like diet and mood. There's an AI component to it around turning that information into something simple and timely for people so they can get feedback and act on sort of information on their own terms, but also potentially summaries that can be shared with their care team and healthcare providers. So that's why it's kind of ideally put across as an ecosystem. So really the goal is more continuous person-centered support that fits naturally into people's everyday life. It's we don't think of it as another app, but more kind of ecosystem. To provide a more tailored holistic care. I wanted to also note that it's still in development for type 2 diabetes, and we're doing co-design workshops and consultation and people living with diabetes, their carers and healthcare professionals. So that'll hopefully determine what that ecosystem I have up there actually looks like and feels and how it works in practice. So we're recruiting, and just to finish on my last slide, that's part of what we're doing now is sort of consulting on how that might look and how it might inform and improve people's behaviors. But really to wrap up, I guess my one take-home message would still be move more, sit less, sleep well. But hopefully finding a version that's just right for you, even when life or health sort of throws curveballs at you. The idea is that these guidelines are more flexible in that regard. We're working and finding ways to make this easier through new digital tools such as Smart T2D. So we'd love any input on the design as we test it out. So if you're living with or care for someone with type 2 diabetes, we're keen to hear from you. But I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much, Paddy. And I know that you've had first-hand experience with the 24-hour guidelines. How many years has it taken in the process?
Yeah, the Australian ones, I think we started back in 2023. So it's been a longer process than I think everyone expected. But the report's done, and that's now, yeah, we're all waiting eagerly for them to come out and think about how we disseminate them as best possible.
Well, thank you so much. And we've heard from the researchers, and now it gives me great pleasure. I've had a lot of interaction with Sarah over the years, talking about healthy lifestyle and healthy living. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Sarah is the lifestyle health editor of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and we're so fortunate to have Sarah join us to share some perspectives on a personal perspectives on how she has been able to integrate more physical activity into her busy life and why it's important to you. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks so much, David. Yes, indeed. It's Goldilocks or Holy Grail, I don't know which. Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear about what the Goldilocks actually is. And I think picking up from Paddy, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about how I personally tried to apply some of that knowledge. But first I have a confession to make. So even though I write about health for a living, I've certainly not always got it just right and have spent a lot of my working life sitting. And as someone who once sort of thought if I couldn't fit in a proper workout, it wasn't worth doing anything. And I would often try to get in a proper workout, but then would spend the rest of my day chained to my desk. So I was also what you might call an active couch potato. And then obviously, as is the case for many of us, on some days, you don't get out at all. Even 20 minutes or 15 minutes can feel like a sort of luxury that you can't afford. And even if you could, you know, what was the point of 15 minutes? I now know better. And I'd like to just chat very briefly about the three things that sort of changed my mind. So the first was necessity. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and when they were born, time and flexibility really did become luxuries. And I quickly realized that if I was going to stay sane and maintain some semblance of health and fitness, I had to change my perception of what was worthwhile. And the second thing was knowledge. So I've been writing for Sydney Morning Herald and The Age now for about 14 years. And during that time, as we've sort of heard today, more and more research was emerging, challenging that kind of idea that exercise has to be long or structured in order to be effective. I think some of the findings that really stuck in my mind were, one, the idea of exercise snacks, where you could get a lot of bang for buck with just a few minutes of intense exercise. Second was the understanding that exercise in any way, shape or form is integral to mental health and good sleep. The knowledge that sitting all day is damaging and is sadly not offset by getting in a proper workout. And then there was the appreciation that there is value in incidental activity and that incremental benefit. So even when we can't do that structured exercise, all the bits of movement we do add up, especially if we incorporate a little huffing and puffing. I mean, I still had that barrier of guilt though. And what helped me to overcome that, taking a break when I'm on work days to sort of get out and exercise or go for a walk, was research finding that exercise improves our cognitive function at work, including attention, working memory, and problem solving. There's also some nice studies showing that acute bursts of vigorous activity lower our markers of stress and enable us to cope better with external stresses. And so the final change for me was in the application of those learnings. So I began making some quite small shifts to my routine. Instead of just sitting all day and maybe trying to get in 30 minutes of exercise, this is sort of what I do now. I try to do 10 or 15 minutes of yoga in the morning to just stretch out and move my body. And I aim to get out for fresh air every day. So when I'm working from home, I might go for a 30-minute run, or if I only have that 15-minute time slot in the day, I might find a nearby hill or flight of stairs and I'll sprint up those a couple of times. And I also try to walk to pick up my kids from school. When I'm at work, I try to get up regularly from my desk to make a cup of tea or refill my water. I've taken to using a sort of smaller glass, so I have to get up more regularly. I go for a short walk at lunch, and on my way home, I often choose a bus stop that's a little bit farther away, so I have to walk that little bit extra. Other things I do, I try to regularly practice mindful breathing while I'm sitting at my desk and take moments to stand up and look up from my screens. And I still aim for longer workouts on the weekend or 1 or 2 days during the week, but on the days I can't, I still get that instant mood lift from movement. And I know now from experience that my brain just fires better when I take regular short breaks. In fact, I find that taking a break often creates a space for ideas to crystallize. So I don't often write articles at my desk, but I write them in my head while I'm walking. And I've learned that even if I don't give my body breaks, my brain will take breaks. So if I'm sat at my desk all day, by 2 or 3 p.m, my brain sort of starts to feel foggy and I'm sort of there, but not really there for the rest of the day. So it actually makes me more productive to take those breaks, even though it seems sort of counterintuitive. And brain aside, I think the pressures of work feel much more manageable. My brain and body feels better. And I think most importantly, I'm a better functioning, happier, calmer parent, partner and person when I have made the time to move, even if it's just for really short bursts throughout the day. And obviously, I think for all of us, there are days none of it happens. And so I guess I aim for good enough. And I find that that relieves some of the pressure, so that when I do move, it's more of a pleasure than an obligation. So I guess for me, finding pockets of time to move, get sunlight, breathe fresh air ultimately makes life much more enjoyable. And the health benefits and flow-on effects to sleep and overall well-being are sort of lovely added benefits. And so I guess the take home for me is that although I don't always get it just right, every moment of movement counts. And I hope that that's what people take from this presentation today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Some brilliant perspectives there of how you've sought to achieve your Goldilocks just right day, and lots of tips and strategies. In particular, the walking the kids to school, which doesn't happen as much nowadays. I'd like to see that more, and congratulations on incorporating those short bursts of activity throughout the day. It's a really key message that we can get bursts of activity regularly throughout the day. So really appreciate your perspectives on your Goldilocks day. We now have 10 minutes of a Q&A session, and I encourage people to submit your questions into the Q&A box. We did have some questions that were sent through previously, but just to remind everybody, we're wanting to keep the questions broad on this topic specifically. And of course, for individual health advice, it's always best to seek the advice of your health professional. One of the questions that came in, and might direct this to you, Patty, is with the physical activity guidelines, are they likely to vary according to ethnicity or adapted to those with disabilities, for instance?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. So there's no sort of strong systematic or biological evidence usually, or it's usually insufficient, that there was kind of a need for a different guideline for different population groups, although inherently I guess we understand that there are individual differences. So the guidelines themselves tend to be pretty similar across the population groups that we look at. In this case, what we have done, what is different, I guess, for example, with people with chronic conditions or disabilities, they've been consulted on what would be barriers for implementation. But the guidelines themselves tend to be pretty consistent across the different population groups, or even by ethnicity or age. There can be slight variations, but they tend to be similar. But I guess the benefit of these sort of new sets of guidelines is that they are flexible for people to, in terms of how they approach it. So that's where it kind of starts to matter, and that's where that stakeholder engagement has mattered about what would be a good way for you to approach this individually. But they don't tend to, I mean, the 24-hour guidelines coming out in Australia won't vary by population group drastically.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Patty. Perhaps this one for Simone and Sarah. How can we spread the word around society so that we can get more people, including our health professionals, to know more about striking this ideal balance of sitting, sleeping, standing, and stepping over 24 hours? So Simone, do you want to have a go first, and then Sarah?
Yes, of course. Yes. Thank you so much for this question, for whoever sent this in. It's a really good question, actually, and we're trying as researchers really hard to make an effort into translating some of our work to more of the general, broader audience, like everyone here on the call today who might have some interest in this topic. We're trying to really use simple messages, trying to create guidelines, for example, and where we use the wording appropriate and easy for anyone that might access this and wants to read it. For example, Patty is working on the current guidelines and really trying to make sure that there is a whole different range of groups involved in that, and making sure that the guidelines are targeted for a range of different groups. We're going to schools to talk to school students and teachers to try and make sure that they are aware of the importance of moving more and sitting less. And I think anyone here on this call who is a practitioner, by incorporating some of the knowledge that you maybe heard today, or some that's available online or around those guidelines, just to bringing up those things in general consults and engaging with your potential clients and patients will be very helpful to make sure that message comes out. I don't know if Sarah has anything.
Thanks, Simone. And just by extension, there was another additional question on the chat, and I think that you're attempting to answer it, Sarah. But just what do consumers want to know most about health and lifestyle in this context?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I find what people are really interested in as sort of obviously new information. So I think this sort of idea that every bit of movement that we do counts, but also new ways of thinking about what we already know. So you might have seen that there was a bit of hype recently around the Japanese walking trend. And, you know, none of that is new, but just the sort of reframing of some of the same knowledge to, you know, make us think about it in a different way or make it more digestible, I think is something that people are always interested in. And I think the other thing is, you know, removing barriers, like how to remove barriers to exercise. And I think one of those things, in my experience, is that sense of, you know, obligation that some people feel. You know, those of us who really enjoy physical activity, we're quite lucky. There's that sort of intrinsic motivation to find ways to do it. But for a lot of people, I think there are sort of negative connotations about being physically active. So finding ways to, I think, you know, personalize it and, you know, show that it can be something that is enjoyable and tailored in very different ways to different people, I think is helpful.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everybody for the questions. I'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. There's one about, does simply standing at your desk count as light physical activity? Even if the Apple Watch doesn't identify it as standing. I've had that experience with my Apple Watch, and what I do know is that the Apple Watch will only indicate a person is standing if a person has taken 10 steps or more within a certain time period. So it doesn't actually detect standing, but it uses standing as one of the goals. Now, Simone, did you want to add to this?
I was actually just writing an answer to the same question in a chat box, so I can I'll share that anyway. But I believe that's definitely still considered light physical activity, despite your watch potentially not picking that up. One thing to flag though is if you want to make in terms of getting the greatest benefits, and in terms of the guidelines, for example, they are normally recommending from at least a moderate intensity to try to get that, but light can kind of get the most out of it. But in terms of light activity, that's often a great substitute for sitting. So if you're sitting a lot and you find it hard to be active in a kind of higher intensity, it might be worthwhile to spend some time in that light activity, and standing is great.
Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to whip through these questions. Maybe, Patty, if I can direct this one to you. Climbing upstairs equally beneficial to climbing downstairs, physical activity-wise, and in particular for bone health?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on what we're talking about. Yeah, so bone health, I mean, in terms of energy expenditure, there's going to be a greater energy expenditure going up because you're pulling your gravity upwards. But yeah, there is work around eccentric loading as a different way of improving muscle health and bone health. So I think I'd be advocating for both, going up and down the stairs. As a general rule, you might just expect slightly different physiological effects from either. But I think both are kind of adding a unique health benefit in their own right.
Okay. This may be for everybody. Do you have any preferred health watches we should buy? I would just be advocating one that's going to help you and motivate you on a daily basis. Many of the watches perform the same functions, and so there's no real preferred over others, but ones that are going to encourage you to find you just right throughout the day. Any other? Do you want to add anything, Simone or Sarah? No. Okay. Patty, I might direct this one to you with your recent publication. Is there still a focus on a daily step target such as 10,000 steps, or are we looking at more at time spent moving, etc., and not a blanket approach?
Yeah, this is an interesting one and speaks to what's going to be coming out likely in the new guidelines. We did a separate set of analyses because we were asked, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of steps? And the number that we sort of arrived at, the magic number, so to speak, wasn't 10,000. It was more closer to 7,000 steps. Thresholds are always funny like this. It's not like 7,000 is a new magic number. Anything less than that was also still beneficial. But that is one thing that's been incorporated as a sort of complementary aspect to the guidelines, because of course, stepping is a useful activity and many people can appreciate and sort of involve themselves with it, but it doesn't cover every type of activity. So there is still a more of an emphasis on more movement that might not involve stepping per se. But yeah, just as a kind of pointed to the number, it seems that lower amounts of stepping may also be beneficial. So around 7,000 is the kind of new magic number, but less than that is also beneficial.
Thank you, Paddy. Well, in the interest of time, I'm sorry that we couldn't get through everybody's questions. We'll attempt to answer them post seminar. I want to thank everybody who has joined us online for today's session, and we hope that you've now found fresh inspiration to find your just right or that ideal balance across the day. And to help you achieve your health goals on a daily basis. I wanted to extend some thanks to our panelists, and a special thanks to Sarah for joining us today and providing that personal perspective. And of course, people who have worked tirelessly to put together our webinar. That includes Jean Crew, Loretta Walsh, and Demi Cox. Thank you so much for all your contributions, and we hope that you take away a just right message for yourself and try to incorporate and set yourself the challenge throughout the 24-hour day moving forward. So thank you for your time. Thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us.